We're talking about force majeure today. You're going to learn what it means, what it does, when it applies. You'll look at some force majeure sample clauses, and I'll give you some examples of business transactions and how they're affected. So here we go. So first, what is force majeure? It's French for superior force. It's a clause that appears towards the end of a lot of contracts, especially service-based contracts. It basically excuses non-performance or not living up to your end of the contract for circumstances out of anybody's control. What does it do? Well, it could stall or suspend everything until the force majeure is removed or eliminated or out of the way. It can say everybody can walk away if a force majeure event happens. It can, but it doesn't always talk about what happens to any money that's changed hands as of the force majeure event. So refunds, deposits, etc. When does it apply? Well, currently everybody wants to know if it applies in the case of a pandemic. And of course the answer is depends on what the contract says. So let's look at these two sample force majeure clauses. In this first version, you can see that force majeure is defined specifically as one of these enumerated things. It talks about weather-related things, wars, riots. Those are the type of things you typically see in a force majeure contract. But this version specifically talks about what is considered a force majeure event. This version is similar but different because it says force majeure includes but is not limited to the following. So that leaves room to say, hey, maybe a pandemic is included in this definition, even though it's not maybe specifically spelled out. So as I said, it can affect different businesses in different ways, but it usually applies to service-based businesses. One example would be in a brand or partnership agreement you've agreed to do as an internet leader or as an influencer. You've agreed to do a certain number of posts on a specific topic. Well, does force majeure somehow prevent you from doing that? Are you supposed to be posting from a live event of some kind or in a specific location that you can't access because of a force majeure event? That's why a force majeure clause would be important in that scenario. It also applies to in-person events, and even though those are in-person and not really internet events, certainly the sales of tickets go on the internet and promotion of the event goes on the internet. So there may be sponsorship agreements or other similar agreements that might need to be looked at because of a force majeure event. So remember, when looking at your contract, you want to see what is a force majeure event under my contract. Is there an express definition of what is considered a force majeure event, or does it have that kind of including but not limited to language? What does my contract say happens during a force majeure event? Is everything just kind of stopped and suspended until everything turns back to normal? Or does it say everybody can walk away if a force majeure event happens with no further obligation? And finally, and you may actually have to look elsewhere in your contract, but what happens to money paid up to that force majeure event date? Does it get refunded? If your contract talks about a non-refundable retainer, I might say, yeah, even if the force majeure clause doesn't talk about what happens to money in the case of a force majeure event, non-refundable means non-refundable. But under your contract, it's important to know what happens, because when an event that's out of anybody's circumstances happens, of course, everyone's going to be worried about funds. So look at your contract, see what it says in terms of what to do in a force majeure event. And I hope that this video has helped you to understand what is force majeure, what's considered a force majeure event, and how it applies in different industry settings. And I will see you next time. Head over to spear-ip.com/challenge and you can sign up to learn 4 things that you can do right now to protect your business online. You will receive 1 thing per week for 4 weeks in your inbox.